Alright. Block party once again, baby, like no other though. Big drink and smoke again, baby. Call everyone you know. Now wave your hands real high up in the sky as we party on the street. And later on, I'm gonna shake the spot with the first sweet thing I meet. I'm real loaded, just taking my time. Baby girl right here is losing her mind. She's all up on me, just working it out. I'm gonna show her what I'm all about. I make my moves real fast like this and like that. So we head upstairs, I grab all my hats. This gangster does this thing and you know. I'll see you later, girl, cause I ain't loving no hope. Block party once again, baby, like no other though.
What is going on, everybody? This is Purple and SKOL'd Media. My guy Justin from Purple and Gold for days. And we got a special guest with us today, Arif Hasan of Pro Football Network, formerly wrote for the Vikings, or actually on the Vikings for The Athletic and Zone coverage, and has been writing on the NFL for over a decade. Welcome in, Arif. Appreciate you tapping in with us, man.
Yeah, of course, man.
Appreciate you. We're going to talk some Vikings offseason, a lot of moves to talk about. Justin, obviously, tapping in, my partner in crime today, part of the Purple and SKOL'd Media family. How you doing, Justin?
I'm good, man. It's that quiet zone between the start of free agency and up to draft time where you kind of just like, okay, everybody wants to give out a letter grade, even though, we're only 3 weeks into the semester. Like we have to have a final grade and stuff. And it's like, there's another part of the semester called the draft and round 2 of free agency. But no, we got to judge it all here now. But it's a cool weekend. We finally getting some of the snow melted up here in Rochester, Minnesota. I can almost see my deck again. It's actually really, really nice to finally have above 30-some degrees. So it's cool, man. It's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get started, Arif, I just wanted to ask you kind of something personal, just as far as the Vikings. Are you a Vikings fan, or you just wrote on the Vikings for a while?
I arrived at the Vikings beat a Vikings fan, but I think, once you're kind of in the press box for a while, it becomes kind of difficult.
Yeah, extremely difficult for sure. A lot of heartbreak as a fan, I'm sure. A lot of heartbreak as a fan. But Justin, you mentioned that it's kind of a slow time for the offseason. I might have to disagree with you on that, man. There's been some talk swirling around with the Minnesota Vikings, and there's been, I guess, speculation of what could possibly happen or what does Kwesi have up his sleeve. But I'll ask you, Arif, this has been kind of a big topic, I guess you can say, is the quarterback position. I mean, every Vikings offseason is a big topic.
every Viking,
it's a big topic for the Vikings,
right?
Yeah, I know, right? So what's your outlook on the future of the quarterback position as a whole for the Minnesota Vikings? Now, we heard Hendon Hooker, we've heard trade up for Will Levis, and the dream scenario of Anthony Richardson. I mean, what's your outlook just on the quarterback position for the Minnesota Vikings?
I think the likely outcome of all of this is nothing. I think that nothing is going to change. Which could be a good or bad thing depending on what you think about Kirk Cousins, right? I mean, it's entirely about it's Kwesi's only been a general manager for 1 year, so I've got no idea. I can't really read him or anything like that. So I could be wrong, right? They could make a move, but I think the most likely scenario is that Kirk Cousins is the quarterback this year. That I think is going to happen 95% anyway, but 99% anyway. But that there's not going to be a clear, succession plan in place by the time the season starts, right? I don't think that that's going to happen. Obviously, there's been like an outside ghost of a rumor kind of about Lamar Jackson, but that's ridiculous. I don't think that's happening.
Oh yeah, that's a touchy subject. That's a touchy subject, Arif. I don't know if we're going to get started on that one.
I mean, personally, it would be exciting, right? Like,
yeah,
good
absolutely.
or bad, it's exciting, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So, you know, from the perspective of like a sports writer, I mean, I'm all in. But,
for writing a content creator, you know,
man.
for those of us doing that sort of thing, it would be. Yeah. It would be delightful. I mean, absolutely. To your point, it's a 2% at best chance of anything other than Kirk Cousins being the quarterback of this team, regardless. It might have been a 5% chance, you know, a couple weeks ago prior to the salary cap conversion of his signing bonus roster bonus to a signing bonus. There was a soft deadline on with 2 additional void years, because if you had done a trade prior to like the day one of the new league year, it would have only been a dead cap hit of $18 million of the remaining 48 of total cap charges that Kirk Cousins has. Now it being, you know, a $38 million dead cap hit if you do it prior to June 1st, or still flipping 28.5 to next year if you did a post June 1st, plus then adding on Lamar Jackson's salary cap to this year. You'd have to do something like what the Cleveland Browns did with Deshaun Watson and make him play for like a $1 million cap hit this year.
With the hope that the Ravens don't match, right? Like,
exactly.
Part of and the hope a super easy cap situation, and then the Ravens are like, oh, it's a pretty easy cap.
I can manage this.
So I think there's that, but it would not shock me if they drafted a quarterback in the first round. I just don't expect it. I think that is unlikely, but because it's a new regime, there's very little that would like truly. I mean, if they got like a fullback or a punter, I'd be flabbergasted, right? Yeah. But there's very little that would shock me, right? So, I think that would probably be the right move, right? Just because you know the way that those extension talks broke down, it doesn't seem like Kirk Cousins is going to guarantee to be the future of the Vikings going forward, right? And so I think that 2024, 2025, certainly an open discussion worth having. And with that in mind, it would make a lot of sense to, I know that there's been some talks about potentially moving up for Will Levis. Sure, why not? I know that there's been some talk about, if Anthony Richardson does happen to drop after all of this hubbub about him kind of vaulting up from number 4 to number 1 for some people. If he does happen to drop after all of that, going up and grabbing him, I think that would make sense. Hendon Hooker, I'm a little bit less confident in. And I say this as somebody who has become more and more open to the idea of being wrong about quarterbacks in the draft. I'm still pretty confident about what I feel about receivers. I'm still pretty confident what I feel about like offensive, defensive linemen. I feel like we could get a handle on that. Quarterbacks, I feel like I'm learning new lessons basically every other year at that position. Yeah. So I could be wrong about Hendon Hooker, but based off, if you force me to give an opinion, I am not confident in this guy. This is a guy that I actually really liked when I was watching Christian Darrisaw when he was at Virginia Tech. I really enjoyed watching it, and then I noticed one of the Darrisaw games, he wasn't playing. And I was like, what's going on with that?
Where's your quarterback?
And I was like, oh, this guy was benched? Oh, okay. And then he transfers because he's not going to win the starting job, which sometimes, you get a Joe Burrow out of that. I'm not saying it's impossible, right? But, that's not a great sign, right? You have to overcome that. And then the Tennessee offense, the more I watch it, the more, it's kind of a fake offense, right?
Yeah. I was looking at that too. Like you'll have receivers on one side of the field just kind of just run it out, just kind of run your guy out, and they don't run routes at all. And it's just, he's reading one side of the field. It's a quick slant, or, the scheme is to read the corner. If the corner's in 3, then you're going to take, the curl down below or the flat down below. So they made it really simple. And that's my concern with Hendon Hooker too. And obviously the ACL and
the age and all that. I think those all.
But I feel like the timeline and the reason to draft a quarterback in this year's draft, and particularly high in this year's draft, I think it makes sense because the prospects that are coming out this year, outside of the top 2 in CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, the guys in Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Hendon Hooker. I mean, even if you want to dig really deep for DTR out of UCLA, Dorian Thompson,
Robinson. I like that guy. I don't know if he's a good quarterback, but his vibes are immaculate.
Very, very Kyler-like as far as the way he plays. And I don't know how I feel about that because I'm not a big fan of Kyler. But I think the timeline and, like I said, the prospects and look, outside of the top two, everybody else, it looks like they're going to have to get at least a year under their belt until they're going to be ready to start anyways.
For sure.
So we're in a position.
And that would be true of like Tanner McKee. That'd be true of Max Duggan. That'd be true of Hendon Hooker and Dorian Thompson-Robinson.
And there's these popular quarterbacks that a lot of the fan base are looking at, but we're forgetting about guys too, like Aiden O'Connell, which I'm not the guy saying we need to go out and draft Aiden O'Connell by any chance. But
doesn't look like Justin is either.
I don't know about O'Connell.
But I mean, we don't know what this coaching staff is thinking. They could like a guy that none of us are talking about, and we're sitting here in the fourth round like we were, what was it, 2 years ago, and we drafted Kellen Mond, and we're like, huh? What? Like, so
I have a little more faith in this coaching staff than I did the last one about picking a quarterback in the third round.
I will say Zimmer was right about Kellen Mond.
Yeah,
right? He was right.
Well, you know, for better or for worse, Zimmer was right about that, and he was right about Kirk Cousins. He's like, this guy's gonna get me fired.
You're right.
By hook or by crook, one way or the other.
So he's got that going for him. But in terms of developing a quarterback, I think that this staff is something we can have. Somebody that we can have like a little bit more confidence. So
more realistically, we'll kind of stick with the draft talk here. We have a couple other topics we'll discuss. You obviously said quarterback, you don't really want to take a chance in the first round unless it's a guy like Will Levis that falls or Richardson. So what do you see us doing at 23? Like the chances of us staying at 23, chances of us trading up, and then chances of us trading back. What would you put the greater chance of between the three of those?
So I think the lowest chance is that they stay put. I think that's the least likely scenario.
I agree.
I think that if someone does fall, right? If someone, whether it's, a cornerback that they love, like a Joey Porter or Christian Gonzalez, or if it's a quarterback like we just talked about, right?
Run to the podium.
Right, exactly. If there's somebody at like 15 that they're like, we would have drafted that guy at 5. I think that they would trade up. I don't think that they're afraid of trading up. It's just, to them, trading up, it probably just has a higher bar, right? That in order to trade up, they have to have more confidence than most front offices would have in order to trade up, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that it's fine to be that hesitant. The flip side of that is that they're very comfortable trading down, which led to, of course, a pair of in division trades that we're gonna tear apart and evaluate for like the next 2-3 years and see, if that was smart or not. The combined number of catches that Jameson Williams and Christian Watson have thus far, not a huge concern, but both of them seem to have sky high upside. So we'll see. But I think that there's a pretty decent chance they'll trade down. The one thing that's kind of stopping me from saying that is absolutely without a doubt something they're going to do is that if you take a look at kind of the way these mock drafts roll out, whether that's a mock draft in January or a mock draft in March, there's one thing that's kind of consistent about all of these, except for the fact that Will Anderson's going top 4 or 5, except for the fact that you've got, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, the top 2 quarterbacks.
Top 2,
the one thing outside of that's been consistent in the middle to late parts of the draft is that there's a cornerback run, right?
Yeah.
When it's somebody like, Keely Ringo, for example, or there's so many first round cornerbacks that I'm just like forgetting.
Oh yeah, it's loaded. It's loaded this year with corner talent. It's loaded.
Like the one guy that might go in the first that I think they're probably not going to be interested in is the nickel guy, the Clark Phillips III, I think. Phenomenal corner from Utah. He's like 5'8", so he's
smaller guy. He's Duke Shelley. So So we're not drafting him, is what you're telling me.
Probably not. But yeah, there's a ton of these guys that the Maryland pair of corners. I really like Deontay Banks. I like him a lot.
I like Bennett. I like Jacorian Bennett.
Yeah, I mean they both have extraordinary potential. So I could see. Especially Banks, but I could see both of them going in the first round. So the South Carolina guy, Cam Smith, I think, all of those guys are going kind of around that area. And so if you don't want to miss out on a cornerback run, that's when it's unlikely that they would trade out. But I think if I were to rank the possibilities, it would be trade down, then trade up, then stay put.
Stay where you're at.
I think that's probably and I think just from the perspective of somebody like Kwesi, what are the odds that the best draft slot for you is the one you end up with at the end of the season? Probably pretty low. right?
Extremely low.
I would imagine that that's what he's thinking. And so the idea that a cliff of talent, I think you want to kind of chase where those cliffs are, that a cliff of talent would be there right where you happen to draft, the odds are pretty low. So I think that's probably how they'll approach it.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, the past 2 drafts we've traded down, right? In the first round, we traded. In past 2 drafts,
I mean, because Spielman loved trading down as well.
Right? Yeah, so we're used to it. I don't know about 20 picks to a divisional rival, but hey,
it was against the law for Spielman to stay at his spot. He thought he would get arrested. Oh, wait a second. My pick is up here.
I think I'm trying to remember the last time he stayed put in the first round. It might have been for Trey Waynes, which great.
Yeah.
Well, technically JJ, but
no, that's
because
right.
it fell to him.
Oh yeah,
that one
if
was
JJ had been gone, if Philly had taken JJ, Rick would have traded there.
Absolutely would have traded there.
Okay, so but sans that, you're right. It was probably because
like Christian Darrisaw was a trade down. Obviously, Jets got AVT out of that.
But Garrett Bradbury, I suppose he was taken at his slot.
Yeah, like 18 or something.
At
like
18,
that? Yeah. But there's been a lot of trade downs to get those extra picks.
Yeah. So what about you, Justin? You feel like we go quarterback in the first round, and what do you feel like are the odds of staying put, trading up, and trading down?
Well, to circle back to a point that you guys had made earlier about these quarterbacks, about how in some ways they're kind of being tricked up because these offenses are just tricked up. That's the case with just about anybody. I mean, technically, Laquan Treadwell was tricked up. He looked really, really good back in the day before his leg got snapped. I mean, I remember before his injury, he was just
astounding.
He was ridiculous. Yeah. But then when you really go back and look at his tape, it's just like, well, yeah, he's just so much bigger and taller, and those passes weren't all that good. It's just he went up and got contested catches because that's all he needed to do. So I agree. To me, I like
Quentin Johnson.
Yeah, I liken these quarterbacks to like going to a steakhouse. You got your nice sirloin steak, you got your New York strip, your T-bones, your ribeyes, and it's like, well, I really like that ribeye, but it's a little too expensive. And I like that New York strip, and I like that sirloin, but it's like you want to always shift the price of one level to the next. I like Will Levis. I would take Will Levis in a heartbeat at 23, but I'm only willing to trade up and give up future first-round picks for somebody like Anthony Richardson, as an example.
I think a great way to put it.
I like Hendon Hooker, but I don't like Hendon Hooker at 23. If we did some trade backs, got one of those cornerbacks or one of those wide receivers, and then we found a way to get
Hooker in the second round, I think would be a coup. I would.
That'd be perfect.
It'd be perfect. I'm not saying it's likely,
all
but
the stuff I said about how I didn't like Hendon Hooker, I would delete.
Take him in the second, though.
Yes.
Trade back, take him in the second.
I'm totally with you. I like his prospects. If you could get him in the second round after trading down and recouping some other value from that 23rd pick and getting another player along with him, I'm fine with it. I'm fine taking Levis at 23. I'm not fine taking Hooker at 23 for those reasons. But having said that, to me, I'm always thinking about, well, what's going to make this team stronger? What one player, the first player we pick, would make this team stronger? And to me, I'm still stuck. I'm trying really hard not to be stuck at if one of those top end wide receivers is available to be your to be Robin for JJ. I know it might not be the smartest thing to do. The smarter thing might be to trade back and recuperate some extra value. But if a guy like Trey Flowers is there, I'm sorry. If Flowers there, I want to take that guy. I mean, am I crazy for just being
very
so
tempting
focused on wide receiver too?
I think that one of the priorities the Vikings should have in this draft is to grab a second receiver. And I think that means that they need to do that in the first 2 days. I don't know, unless it's a who's the other not 6 foot receiver, like 6'2" receiver besides Quentin Johnson?
Tank Dell.
God, I don't really love Tank Dell that much, but
don't tell Rap that.
Don't tell Rap that. You talking about Addison? You talking about Addison or
Addison?
Jordan
Addison. Yeah, and he's been following to us in mock drafts too. If he's there, I think you got to take him.
Right, and I think so. But I think that when you've got if you're outside of Johnson and Addison, right? It's all slot receivers. This entire draft is slot receivers. It's like Josh Downs, Xavier Hutchinson, like you said, Zay Flowers, right? All of these guys, or Jalen Hyatt, right? All of these guys some of them are super speedy, right? But all of these guys are like below 6 feet tall, and their play style, because sometimes you can get somebody like a Tyreek Hill, right? That's like 5'10", and can play on the outside. Their play style, maybe a little less for Flowers, but I think their play style, generally speaking, is best suited in the slot for who they are, how they play, in the way that they attack space. Like Josh Downs, especially, I think that would be true for, right? And Jalen Hyatt was like built in a lab to be a slot receiver, I think. Just because like that's the only way you can translate what he does at Tennessee to the NFL. I don't think you can translate him as a flanker, right? So that to me is something that there's going to be a bunch of receivers that fall out of that first round because of that limited versatility. And I think that you would be better suited to grab that in the second round. So if, for example, let's say you traded down from like 23 to 30 and you grabbed, another third round pick, right? If you did that, and then at 30, you grabbed like Deonte Banks, cornerback. I think that would be phenomenal, right? And then you package a third and a fifth to move into the second. You grab, one of those quarterbacks we just talked about, and then you grab like a Xavier Hutchinson. What an astounding draft!
That would be that would be a dream scenario.
Yeah, and I think that you don't need to get, because of the number of receivers that we've got in this draft that have very similar skill sets and projections. I think that you don't need to get your receiver in the first round, but I do think that they need to come away with somebody that they're confident is a potential wide receiver too. And hey, if they lose a competition to KJ Osborne, fine, fantastic. I would trust KJ Osborne, if he won a competition, to be the receiver too. I have a lot of confidence in him, but I want that competition to exist, right? Because I'm not 100% confident that he can play that second receiver role outright. I want him to be able to prove it against some reasonable restrictions on his ability to do that. So
last thing on his wide receivers before we move on to them. At what, and you'll be able to better answer that because you're a little more plugged in. You got to do a little more in depth. All we heard about Justin Jefferson was all he was as a slot receiver, right? Now, obviously, again, he is the 100th percentile of being completely miscast. So I don't want it to be that, they say the same thing about this guy. Therefore, all these other guys don't necessarily have to be pigeonholed into being slot receivers. But where do you draw the line as to a reasonable evaluation of, are these guys truly just slot receivers, or is that just kind of what our traditional mindset has been for, their size, so to speak?
Oh, totally fair. Totally fair. And I would, if I'm drafting a guy in the second round, I would let them compete for that outside job 100%. I would want to be proven wrong, because it means I got a ton of value out of this guy, and he can do more than I thought, right? The difference, I think, between these players and Justin Jefferson and the way that we, aside from, what Justin Jefferson turned out to be, if we just talk about like college evaluation, right? I think that the difference is, for Justin Jefferson, a lot of that discussion was just because he played in the slot. Right. It's where LSU put him. And that was only his final year. The year before, he played on the outside. Right. But that year that he had at LSU, he was playing in the slot. That is not an evaluation based off of his traits. Right. It was not an evaluation about how does he do against press, which we didn't have a ton of information on that year just because he didn't see it that much. But, how does he do against press? What does his release package look like? How does he do when there's physicality? Right. What happens when there's a contested catch? What are the routes that he's capable of running? That was not a part of that argument, right? When people were talking about him as a slot receiver, they just said, hey, he played the slot. We don't know if he can play on the outside. It was not, I don't think that his release is very good in tight spaces. It was not, I think he can get rerouted really easily at the sideline. It was not, he has poor sideline awareness. It was none of that. It was playing the slot. These receivers that, like your Zay Flowers and Xavier Hutchinsons and so on, a lot of them are playing on the outside in college because they're their team's best receiver, right? But they project to play in the slot because you're a lot less confident about their release against press. You're a lot less confident about their ability to use the sideline positively and to get pushed out at the sideline, right? You're a lot less confident about their ability to run a full route tree and be able to take advantage of the outside route tree versus the inside route tree. And it's traits-based projection, right? And so I think that there's something to be said about how we can be a little bit more confident that at least the majority of these receivers are primarily slot types than we were with Justin Jefferson, because that was a usage thing, not a traits thing. And here it's actually the opposite. Their usage was on the outside. And I think Josh Downs is almost exclusively played on the outside for North Carolina. But his skill set right now, to me, screams slot receiver. And you draft him, you let him compete against outside corners, have him go up against Deonte Banks or Andrew Booth or Caleb Evans or whoever on the outside. And if he's winning, let him play on the outside, right? And now you've got an even better receiver than you thought. But at the time, when it comes to evaluating a player and trying to slot what their value in the draft is, you should primarily project them as potentially a slot only person.
Yeah, I agree. I think with Justin Jefferson, it wasn't about his size. It was about what he put on film is pretty much what you're saying. That's all you could really go off of. We only saw him in the slot. We didn't see him outside necessarily because they had Jamar Chase outside. And now I don't remember the other guy they had on, but I'm sure he's probably playing.
He's also in the NFL.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yet another NFL guy. So obviously you
got three deep, and you got Joe Burrow. Shockingly, they won the national championship. And nobody could touch
them. They did all right for themselves.
They did pretty good. Yeah.
So I got to give some shout outs to everybody tapping in with us. Obviously, Rap over there at Purple Pocket Podcast. If you don't already, go give him a subscribe. We have Just Vibes always tapping in with us. Thank you, Just Vibes. Yogi always Yogi tapping in, active with the comments. Obviously, Purple and Gold for days, showing love. Go and hit that subscribe button for them. Dylan Dotson showing us love. Talking SKOL'd, SK Day, and Arif in the house. Appreciate you tapping in, Dylan. And then who else we got? In the Zone Podcast.
What's up, Zone?
In the Zone podcast, go and give them a subscription as well. He's always tapping in with us and showing us love, so we appreciate you guys. But this is my next topic, man. This is kind of a touchy one as well, outside of the quarterback position, and it's a very interesting one, and that's the Dalvin Cook situation. Now, obviously, he's owed $14 million, or his cap hit is $14 million, give or take, this year. And we decided to re-sign Alexander Mattison to a 2-year deal. So what's going on with Dalvin, Arif? I mean, we just know what we know on the surface. What's behind the scenes, if you know anything? What's going on with Dalvin?
So, I mean, I don't know a ton behind the scenes. I do know that Dalvin Cook is not really budging on potential renegotiation. So it's either, take me as I am or trade me, I think is kind of the message. And, the Vikings don't have to do that, but, I think they prefer to be able to find some value out of that. I think that the last thing they want to do is cut him and only save $7 million against the cap or something like that. So when they re-signed Mattison, I didn't think that was necessarily the end of Dalvin Cook or anything like that in Minnesota, but I did think, you re-sign him to, was it like $3 million a year or something like that?
Yeah, 2.5 to 3, something like that.
Yeah,
right around there.
It wasn't much.
It very much felt like that's kind of what you pay a committee back, right? Like that's like, hey, we brought in Alexander Mattison, he's going to be our Latavius Murray, now we just need to bring in like our Mike Boone or whatever, right? Like that, I think it feels like, and you've got like a pair of them, right? You got Kenny Nwangu and you've got Ty Chandler. Both of them can play a complementary role to what Mattison does. And so it very much feels like, that there is a backfield that they're willing to work with. But the thing is, the Vikings have talked a lot this offseason about how important the run game is going to be for them this year. We have seen a lot of analytically minded front offices emphasize the run game. Cleveland, I think, is a big example, but the Ravens are another big example. And so, you've got these people on the sidelines that talk a lot about analytics and how important it is to pass versus run. Then you've got like the teams that are actually analytically forward and say, well, running works sometimes. We got to figure out how to make it work, but it's definitely helpful. And running has become more efficient over the past couple of years because teams have sold out against the pass. They put more defensive backs on the field. They're less likely to put those additional defensive backs in the box, right? So you got light boxes, and you're +1 in the running game a lot of the time. So it's become more efficient, but the Vikings are not more efficient. They're like 28th in the NFL in expected points when running the ball. And so there's been a lot of emphasis on improving that. That's why they signed Josh Oliver, right? The whole reason is
they were quick to do that.
Yeah. And they didn't care what you thought about it, right?
At all. We're gonna pay him too. So
the whole deal is to improve the running game to help out the passing game, right? Because they're saying, hey, Justin Jefferson's getting doubled a lot, and there's two ways to handle that. One is to throw to a receiver who's not doubled, or it's to run the ball, because when you double a receiver and that receiver goes downfield, now you've taken two guys out of the play. Let's run the ball, right? So I think that's going to be kind of an emphasis. And so with that in mind, Does it make sense to really move Dalvin at a cost? I don't know. If you can get him for a 3rd round pick, I think that would be good, right?
Take it and run. Take it and run.
But because the team that would trade for him would, I think, take on like 7 million, 6.8 million or something like that in cap, and the Vikings would have 7. And I think that would be a pretty good deal for that team. The issue, of course, is, it's probably difficult to gin up a market for him because of the surgery that he had in the offseason. They probably want some closure on what that looks like for him. And that'll probably drop his price until maybe the draft. Maybe they trade him during the draft. Those things happen too. Okay. But for right now, it might just be that they kind of have to absorb it. And so the 2 biggest, I guess 3 biggest dramas were, if you include Adam Thielen, but the 3 biggest questions or dramas were like Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen. That's been resolved, right?
Yeah.
Zadarius Smith, it doesn't look like that's getting resolved.
I'm
not 100% confident.
Who knows
what's going on there? I have some idea, right? It's that Zadarius Smith signed a deal with low guarantees with the expectation that this would essentially be a prove-it deal, but it would look good on paper, and that he would be able to negotiate a new deal after he had a really great season. And he had a really great season. And so I think that that's just part of it, is that his understanding was that this would be functionally more of a 1-year deal. It's not. And the Vikings love the price that they, yeah, right. Yeah. It's like, we can have you for,
you proved it.
Right.
Now we keep you on that bogus 2nd year.
Yeah, exactly. And so, he was fantastic last year. The Vikings
the first half. Absolutely.
So, first half.
So, I think that, as his sacks have dropped off in the second half of the season, his pressures were still relatively consistent. So I thought that he played pretty well. Luckily, the Danielle Hunter in the second half of the season really took off. And so he kind of had like a little bit of a balance there. But, great. They want that player. And so it doesn't look like he'll get that release. It sounds like, there might have been some possibility of a trade, but, they weren't going to commit to losing value on a guy that they have under contract. And so, I think that I think that the only real kind of one I just don't know about is the Dalvin Cook one, because I could totally see them rolling into the season with a $14 million cap hit on a running back that they kind of don't want, right? And building around the potential of Madison and Chandler and Nwangwu.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
They doubled down on improving the run game too by re-signing and extending CJ Ham, which was he, like 15% of the offensive snaps, if even that, last season? So, you're showing right now we're gonna be using a lot more CJ Ham, and if you're paying a guy that much and extending him and still only gonna be using him 15% of the time, that's not a very good business move, in my opinion. Yeah. So they're doubling down on, hey, look, our first signing in free agency, we rushed to the podium to sign Josh Oliver, which, hey, look, to me seems like he's a great blocking tight end. Don't get me wrong. Now, I didn't feel like you had to be that quick to sign him, maybe give him that much. Now, I know the details of the contract may not be as much.
They're very friendly to the Vikings.
Yeah, very friendly.
It's
from
like
what I've heard.
3.5 year one is the cap hit. Year 2, the cap hit is closer to 7. It might be 7 outright, and then year 3 is a fake year. And that one's like 10 million. So so it's really a 2-year $5 million deal.
Oh wow,
which that's nice. Really kind of what it is.
So it's a lot of incentive based, or is it more like signing bonuses?
Well, it's just that all of that extra money that everyone's worried about is in a 3rd year that's just not going to be. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
Right? The Vikings are not going to pay him $10 million and he's not going to want that deal either, because there's no guarantees in that 3rd year, and so it's just going to be renegotiated to whatever makes sense for them from the market perspective. So it's really a 2-year $10 million deal, which I think that sounds a little bit more reasonable. But the thing with I remember when Oliver was signed, a lot of people were like, is that it for CJ Ham? And I thought that was a pretty reasonable question. But after the first kind of 48 hours, right? I've got an episode that's titled The First 48 Hours of the Norse Code Podcast. It's about this. After the first 48 hours, he's safe. If they don't do anything right away, he's fine. And so they didn't. And I knew that he was going to get extended, and then he did. Right. And so, Yeah, I think that they're really excited about the versatility that he provides. You know, obviously he's a fullback, he's a blocker, and that's primarily what he's going to do. But they like his ability to catch in space. They like his after catch capability. They think that he's relatively athletic for a fullback, which it's mostly true, right? He's no Kyle Juszczyk, but I think compared to a lot of fullbacks, he's pretty good.
Oh, yeah, right? I would say he's a top 3, top 5 fullback.
Top 5, I would agree with. I think that there's a tendency among fan bases to think that their own fullback is the top fullback. Of course. Like you ask a Ravens fan and they're like, Patrick Ricard, the 300-pound fullback, he's the best one, right? You ask Chiefs fans are like, Mike Burton, he's the best fullback.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so it's tough sometimes, right?
In 1998, Charles Evans was the greatest fullback in the league. People were saying
number 1 Pro Bowler.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, and
I think the only fullback that didn't receive that was Nafahu Tahi. I think everyone.
Exactly. We never thought he was the best. But,
oh man.
I think his leadership on special teams is probably another thing that they're going to throw.
CJ Ham? No, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, he's a special teams captain. I think that was earned for sure. Plus, he's out there on basically every unit, including like kickoff return, which is great.
Right.
I think that they really value the special teams component, like you said, but I think that they like that they can line him up in line, they can line him up in the backfield, they can run the ball with him on 3rd and 4th and short, or they can have him catch the ball, right? Like, which not every fullback can do that, right? So I think that Mike Tolbert was a really good fullback, but he was not a pass catcher. Right.
Yeah.
I think that there's some value in that. Plus, it allows you to be really multiple in the way that you approach an offense. Because let's say you line up in like 22 personnel, right? So the only receiver you have on the field is Justin Jefferson, right? Then you've got Dalvin Cook. Let's say he's still on the team. You've got CJ Ham, and then you've got Josh Oliver and TJ Hawkinson, right? They're putting out their base personnel. I mean, they might even do like a jumbo, right? They might put out they might have like a 5-3 where they've got 5 people at the line of scrimmage. They got 3 linebackers because they expect you to run the ball. Maybe it's 3rd and short. And then, CJ Ham can line up in the slot. TJ Hawkinson can split outside. Josh Oliver's probably still in line as a tight end. And Dalvin Cook is a receiving threat. Suddenly you've got a pretty reasonable group of pass catchers that can probably win against a 5-3 set that is designed to stop the run because there's 2 corners and a safety. Okay. Great. 2 of those guys are going to have to deal with Justin Jefferson, right? And so now you've got a linebacker whose only job these days is to stop the run up against TJ Hawkinson, right? Or up against CJ Ham. And now you've got probably somebody open that can catch the ball. So I think that they like that kind of versatility in certain situations where they can put CJ Ham on the field and not have to commit to necessarily running the ball, but primarily the idea will be to run the ball.
Well,
they're going to run the ball to CJ Ham. Can we at least not line up in shotgun on 31 just once in a while? Is that too much to ask her?
No.
It's a lot.
No end arounds with CJ Ham.
Yes.
No end arounds.
We got 7 options on an end around, and CJ Ham is number 7, and we do that a times.
Get it to Rager. Get anybody but CJ Ham on it.
You say that, but then Josh Oliver's going to get it, and you're all going to get mad. He's actually really fast. I'll be honest. Oliver's actually pretty fast.
Yeah, no, but to your point, to my knowledge, he was actually a really good pass catching tight end coming out of the draft. Yeah. So
in college, he was a receiving only guy.
And
be able to block.
Let's also take into consideration that we could say we love Lamar Jackson, or you could say you hate Lamar Jackson, but we can all say Lamar Jackson has struggled to get the ball to his receivers the majority of the time. Regardless of how much you love him, but. So I can't necessarily say or put that much weight into Josh Oliver's pass catching abilities when I saw him do it in college, but then he went to an offense that's obviously a run heavy offense. He's a great run blocker as a tight end, but they necessarily haven't given him the opportunities to be a pass catcher.
I'll say this about that. So when he was drafted by Jacksonville first, and then he went over to Baltimore.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Which, I don't know if I trust Urban Meyer to build an offense for his players. So
well,
yikes. So you could say something about that. In Baltimore, Josh Oliver was the 3rd tight end, which is another reason that people were mad that the Vikings, quote unquote, spent so much money on him. Because if you could choose between Mark Andrews and Josh Oliver, who are you picking?
Very true. Very true. Very true.
And so when they're throwing the ball, it's Mark Andrews out there, right? But they do want to, mix in, their other tight ends, right? And I forgot who the second tight end was. Might have been Hayden Hurst some years.
Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely.
Oh yeah. So absolutely right. So like if you've got Isaiah Likely, who is
a pass
really
catcher,
high potential pass catcher, right? And then it's Josh Oliver. It's like, well, you're only putting the third guy on the field when you're running the ball anyway, right?
So, yeah, that makes sense.
I think that there is a lot of opportunity for him to be an impact pass catcher in Minnesota, but I don't think that is the idea, right?
Well, yeah, him and Johnny Munt are going to be, going back and forth for that tight end 2 spot, in my opinion.
I don't think Johnny Munt's got much of an argument.
No, I like Johnny Munt. I'm a Johnny Munt fan, man.
I don't think he's done anything wrong or anything bad. It's just
steady
guy, $7 million a year. Which I guess I was saying it's really $5 million, but
yeah,
you give him that contract, right? I don't know if Johnny Munt's got an argument.
You better be getting some playing time, right?
Yeah. When you're one of those guys that just kind of does all the dirty work here and there, your expectation level should just be, hey, I'm just a guy that does the dirty work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Couple more shout outs. Too Evil to Hope tackled it. He's shooting us some questions. I'm gonna get to those right now. Shout out to Darrell Madison, Alexander Madison's father. That's my boy right there. Family tapping in. Appreciate you, my guy.
Glad your son is back with us.
Yes, sir. I'm glad for sure. We got plenty of more partying to do for those away games. So we have a question from Too Evil to Hope. If the Vikings don't draft a quarterback or wide receiver this year, what do you think their plan is? I think Too Evil to Hope is referring to the first round or maybe first 2 rounds if we don't draft a quarterback or a wide receiver. So what do you think their plan is if we don't go quarterback in the first couple rounds?
Well, I think that it would be to engage with Kirk Cousins to have extension negotiations next year, and that way you could probably avoid the dead hit from the void year, right? Because you're just extension to the contract, you're no longer voiding anything. Yeah. You will still have to absorb the every year cap hit, but that just becomes normal. So I think that their plan would be KJ Osborne's wide receiver 2. We're going to go heavy personnel a lot more often, so having an additional receiver is not going to be all that important, relatively speaking. They're still probably going to get a receiver in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round that they're going to want to have compete with Osborne. And they'll give Jalen Reagor some opportunities. I don't know how you feel about that, but that is on the table, right?
I don't know, man. Every time we gave that guy a chance, man, something bad happened. Outside of that Chicago game with the end around.
I put myself out there for that guy. I was just like, he needs to be wide receiver 3, not kid. Yeah, that didn't go over. So
I tried to predict a touchdown for him every week.
just come on, man. Yeah,
just get in there.
But yeah, I think that the plan would be to have a 3rd, 4th, 5th round guy along with KJ Osborne and play primarily out of a 2 receiver set, and then hope that next year you've got the ability to extend Kirk Cousins long term and to kind of bring all of that together, right? The reason you're not drafting a quarterback or wide receiver is because you're drafting somebody else, right? Like the team is going to get better in a different way, and I think they would be defensively, right? Whether that is to have a linebacker, because I don't think Jordan Hicks is the answer right next to Brian Asamoah. I think you want to get another guy, right? And so whether that's to get a linebacker, whether that's to get a corner or 2 corners, right? Whether that's to get a defensive tackle, right? I think that there's a lot of opportunities for the Vikings in the first 2 days to make that defense a lot better. Primarily, I think at cornerback, but I think that we're not limited to that when we're talking about ways to make that defense better. And so the plan will be that we want to have a more complete team this year, right? Maybe that means we sacrifice our ability to have a high-end receiver pair next to Justin Jefferson, but Jefferson's going to get 1,800 yards anyway. I don't care. We're going to throw the ball to TJ Hawkinson and Justin Jefferson and whoever else happens to show up that day. And then we're not going to allow 28 points a game or whatever. We're going to try and keep that down. And so I think that's the plan. The plan is to have a much better defense and to have the offense continue to perform at a high level without a secondary receiver.
Were you shocked they didn't bring Duke Shelley back or didn't make it happen?
You just had to bring it up, didn't you, Justin?
We got to rip the Band-Aids off. We ripping Band-Aids off.
If you take a look at some of these guys that again, really phenomenal stories, all credit to Duke Shelley, but if you look at some of these guys that get signed off another team's practice squad, play I don't know if limited snaps is the best way to characterize it, because Shelley legitimately just beat out Cameron Dantzler, right?
Yeah.
But like
who also got cut
from right? Yeah. But like played like 4 or 5 games with the snaps and played at a really high level, but from a traits perspective, you don't really project it, right? Seeing how they perform the next year, typically it's not actually as much as fans kind of want, right? Like that's like a Charles Johnson's a pretty decent example of a guy that was kind of like that, right? Or like Josh Robinson had one year where he was outstanding for like 6 games, right? And he was like a top 10 corner for like 6 games, right? Marcus Sherrills, whenever he played really well, and I think everyone was always surprised, and I think that's fair, right? And it's like Kelvin Benjamin's 6'5". What are you doing? How are you doing? Right? Like that kind of thing, right? But the Vikings, to their credit, were never like, that's the answer.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. I think it's the same thing with Duke Shelley, where they're like, we'd love to have him back. Absolutely, we'd love to have him back, but no way are we paying $1.5 million to bring him back. Right? We're up against the cap. We kind of project him to be an outside guy, but he would be an ideal 5th corner, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what they saw him as, and so that's what they offered. Like, what was it, 1.2, 1.3? I think is what they offered. They ended up signing somewhere else for 1.3. And I think he was right to be insulted by that. I think both parties have a pretty good argument for the way that they handled it. Yeah. And if I was Duke Shelley, I'd be like, I don't know what else you want me to do. I played amazingly, right? And I did everything you asked me in a bad defensive scheme without great coaching, and I held it down. I beat out the guy that you expected to start the season. I was healthy, which is a pretty great upgrade over literally everybody else. And I wasn't a liability. So I don't know why you wouldn't pay me. And I think from his perspective, that's right. So he took a deal that was a little bit more somewhere else, so that he could prove it again, right? Which always sucks as a feeling after you have an opportunity to prove it and you feel like you have to prove it again, right? So I think that's it. I think that from the Vikings perspective, when you see that situation, more often than not, it does not, that is not your answer. More often than not, you end up with Holton Hill, right? That's what happens, right?
Holton.
And so you don't want to be caught in a situation where you're overcommitted to a guy where because they did pretty well for like 4 or 5 games, now you expect this person to be able to like take up a somewhat significant chunk of your cap space. I get it. I probably would have offered 1.4, 1.5 mil if that's all it took. But I wouldn't have promised him anything, right?
Yeah, it'd be incentives.
I have no idea if it's a fluke. If it's not a fluke, you'll prove it in training camp. We'll give you an opportunity to compete with the 2s and the 1s.
Yeah, I said it from the beginning that he's a very good 4th or 5th cornerback, and he's a very good red zone cornerback.
Yeah.
It's easy to do that when you've only got 30 yards to defend as opposed to 70 yards to defend. Again, Kevin O'Connell always talk about being situationally good. He was very situationally good in the red zone. Obviously, the overtime knockdown of that pass to the Buffalo Bills tight end is one that'll stand out. Some other plays. But if you look at a lot of his plays, a lot of it was in the red zone. And yes, expecting a guy like that to then all of a sudden be your second cornerback might be asking too much. To a good point that Two Evil had is like, okay, well, how is it we can extend a CJ Ham or sign a backup tight end for that, but we can't keep a Duke Shelley? Well, there's some truth to that, but it's not an all or nothing type situation. But I like what you said earlier, that both sides can be right about this. It's like, hey, we understand that you're probably looking for a little bit more, but we also understand the Viking side is say, hey, we're not going to put you in as a cornerback too and put you in a position to not do what you do well. So it's kind of one of those things where he was a highlight of the season last year, but we picked him up. The story we've all talked about, we all know about, and to have him step in when we had so many injuries with Evans and Booth Jr. and then Dantzler just not being all that good. But it was kind of one of those, it's like, you see him sign for what he did. It's just like, really, we couldn't have kept him. I don't know.
No, I totally get it. And again, if I were the Vikings, the Vikings would be a lot worse, but if I were the Vikings, I probably would have extended an offer. But like, in terms of like, how do we have cap space for Ham but not Shelley? Ham, they 100% project to play a good chunk of snaps. There is a really good possibility that Duke Shelley, if he had signed with the Vikings, would play 0 snaps for them this year.
Yeah.
That's the difference, right? You don't want to be caught. And I know that the cap is like $240 million. It's huge, right? But you don't want to be caught giving $1.5 million to somebody who's never going to see the field. And there is a real possibility that that's where you are with Duke Shelley. There's outside of injury, which then it goes on injured reserve and you got a different cap calculation. Outside of injury, there's no situation where CJ Ham sees 0 snaps. Like you said, he had 15% of snaps last year. I think we all project him to have more than that this year. And so that's how you can pay that guy and not the other guy.
Yeah, and he's held to a very high regard within the locker room and the front office as well. So what a lot of people don't realize is, we just look at the players on field, and obviously that's the first thing you got to look at. What is your performance on the field? But you got guys like CJ Ham who plays such an instrumental part in the locker room that you'll pay a little extra for a guy like that because he means so much to the guys in the locker room. So I think that also added to us, outside of us doubling down on the running game, obviously, but that's what kept us, or that's what kept CJ Ham around. Actually, made us give him an extension. He's going to retire Minnesota Viking. And he's very important to that locker room.
And to that last point, real quick, SK, you got rid of somebody in Adam Thielen and Eric Hendricks, and you didn't bring back Patrick Peterson. And those are 3 of your top 5 leaders of the overall locker room. So, yes, there's a little bit of point to be said there as well. It's just like, we got to keep some of our leadership core around. We got to keep some of the, the stalwarts in here to keep this room.
And I think that's why the extension for Harrison Smith was so critical.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that played a major part in that. But I mean, from reports, it said Harrison Smith didn't want to leave. His agent was talking to other teams, and he told his agent, shut it down. I'm not going anywhere else. I don't know how true that is.
What do you think of that, Arif? What do you think of that?
It's lovely.
I don't know if I would ever call Harrison Smith a liar. He's a very forthright person, so I don't know if I'd go that far. I'm just saying, I hear that kind of stuff a lot. Right? It's just
like the Carolina Panthers are Super Bowl contenders with
with
Andy Dalton.
Andy Dalton is we can win with this guy.
Right? Because imagine if like Harrison Smith was like, I don't want to play anywhere else, shut it down, and his agent's like, are you sure? Because we're gonna get $20 million a year. And he's like,
wait a minute.
Open it back up. Turn it back up.
Right. So, there's like a limit to all of these, right? But I mean. Yeah, and sometimes they're real, right? Like Anthony Barr pulling out of the deal with the Jets to return to the Vikings, which I think probably turned out to be a bad career move for him. Yeah. But is in the moment was a really great story for the Vikings locker room and the camaraderie and how close they are together and all that. But hindsight's 20/20. Who would have known, right? But like, you hear a lot of these stories where we're like, oh man, they worked out a deal and he took a massive pay cut to stay home. And it's like, would he have gotten a better deal elsewhere? I don't know. I don't think so. So
it would have to be a contender, right? For someone to really pay for him to come in and be kind of an anchor on the defensive side of the ball. Like it would have to be
and there's not a lot of teams that value safeties like that. And the teams that do have safeties, right? Like the Ravens are a good example of one of those teams. Like remember when they picked up like Eric Weddle when they had a number of injuries, but they had so many safeties that they traded away Chuck Clark, right? And Chuck Clark's a good player, And so they which I think he went for like a 3rd round pick, so that makes sense. But they have like Kyle Hamilton and they got Marcus Williams and they've got a number of other safeties, and so there's just not a lot of teams that are at a point where they want to pay for a safety to give them 1 or 2 years of contention on defense as their kind of centerpiece for what they do. And the teams that do have generally invested a lot in safety. Like maybe the Chargers are another good example, and they just had Nasir Adderley retire. But I don't know if I don't know if you want to pay Derwin James and another guy, right?
Yeah.
And so, I don't know that Harrison Smith would have gotten that market, and I'm sure he was aware of the deals that he probably would have gotten before he told his agent, it's not worth the hassle. Maybe I could get $1 million here more, right? Maybe I could get $500,000 more here. Maybe I could get a better incentive structure, a better chance to win over here. The hassle's not worth it. I would much rather stay in Minnesota. That I 100% believe.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't believe that if like someone was like, I need $20 million a year.
Shut it down.
No, I don't want that 20.
Purple and gold, baby.
It's like his hobby is like having and flying airplanes. He could figure out how to use 20 million,
Right. All right. So we'll take one more question, and then we'll cap it off with a little draft prediction from all 3 of us. I'll get your kind of outlook on that. But another question from Too Evil to Hope. He's been hitting us with some good questions today. He said, will Arif be mad? This is a personal one for you, Arif. Will Arif be mad if the Vikings move into the teens to draft Levis?
I don't actually have anything against Levis. I just I think the only things I've said about him are that it would be very funny if the Panthers used their number 1 overall pick to draft him.
Yeah,
that would be hilarious.
Absolutely.
And I don't think he's a top 2 quarterback. And I think that if you could make the argument for Anthony Richardson, I think it'd be much more difficult to make the argument for Levis. But I wrote a piece for all 4 of these quarterbacks, the case for them to be picked number 1. There are arguments, right? I do think that he is a good first-round type quarterback. And I do think the Vikings should invest in the quarterback position long-term. And the teens are an okay place to draft a guy like Levis. They're not amazing. Like you said, 2023, that's a little bit better. But the teens, I think, are fine. I would not want them, moving up to 18 to draft him, fantastic. Moving up to 9 to draft him, I think that would be a huge mistake.
Yeah.
Right. Move up to 9 to get Richardson, not Levis, with all due respect.
And so no, I don't think I'd be mad. I obviously have to look at the compensation, right, for me to get a full understanding. And I think that the Vikings have a number of holes that they need to address if they want to compete now. And they've basically signaled that they want to compete now. Otherwise, I think it would have been easy to offload Zadarius Smith, or right, they wouldn't sign Marcus Davenport to a 1-year contract, right? So I think that they do want to compete now. And in order to do that, there's a lot of holes that they have to fill. So if they sacrifice the 2nd and 3rd round to move up into the teams to draft Will Levis, that would be a very confusing signal to send. And I want to know how they intend to address the fact that there's 2 cornerbacks in the room. That seems like an important thing to resolve.
Byron Murphy and
right.
That's pretty much it. Byron Murphy and the giggle,
And I like what Caleb put together, but it's just, again, it's like a Duke Shelley thing. It's I don't know if I trust it.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's definitely some grounds to be shaky on. So, but let's get a little draft prediction. Now, if you were to guess who the Vikings say we stay at 23. I know you said that's probably the least likely scenario for the first round for the Minnesota Vikings, but say we stay at 23, what would be your prediction on who the Minnesota Vikings draft?
Well, I said his name 3 times or 2 times already. I'll say it a 3rd time and make that my prediction. Deonte Banks, cornerback from Maryland. I just like him. I just like him. He doesn't have many interceptions. I think it's 1 or 2 career interceptions. But every receiver, because he shadowed at Maryland, every receiver he shadowed had the worst day of their season, right? He did a phenomenal job shutting people down. His athletic testing is out of this world. He's got really good, I wouldn't say great, but really good length. And he kind of fits the parameters for the kind of cornerback the Vikings seemingly want to draft. Again, it's difficult to tell because, the 10 split was so important to Kwesi, but is it going to be important with Brian Flores being the guy? But, getting a guy that can play off-man coverage or press-man coverage seems really important for this defense, the way that it's evolving. So that's my guess.
Okay. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. Deonte Banks, and I wouldn't be mad at it at all. What about you, Justin? What do you think?
Well, to Zone's point, he just put up, and I had that thought in my head regardless before he even put it up there. It's kind of a tried or true thing right now with the Minnesota Vikings is taking a cornerback in the first round. I think if you look at the last 10 years, there's at least 7 of them at least where, and now granted, there were years we had multiple first round picks. So, take that for what it's worth. I think if the restriction is that they are staying at 23, they're not moving up or down, then I would imagine it would probably be a cornerback of some sort. I'll say 75% chance that it's a corner and probably 20% chance that it's a wide receiver. Not to go,
no interior defensive line, no Cansey, Elijah Cansey. If
Elijah Cansey's there, that's a different conversation. I just don't think he will be. But if
it just may not be a fit.
That's the key. Yeah. And to just move it along here, I think if it's going to be at 23, I think it's most likely going to be another corner, regardless of the fact that that's just kind of the boring same old thing that we've done for years most of the time.
I mean, we say it every draft season. Oh well, I think we're in a position to draft best player available. Draft best player available. Let's go out there and draft Bijan Robinson.
Yes.
No.
When's the last time the Vikings drafted a player not at a position in need in the first round? I guess Lewis Seen, right? But before that,
was it imperative that they took Jefferson to replace Diggs, or again, it was one of those?
You had to go receiver. You had to go receiver there. So I don't think.
And I do believe the Vikings were genuine when they said, no, regardless of position, he was our best player available. I believe them.
In that instance, it's kind of hard to argue.
Peterson? Would it be Peterson?
Peterson, yeah. And Spielman that was like his first year as like I shouldn't say full-time GM because that was the triangle of authority. Yes. But his first year being in charge of the draft is maybe the best way to put it. At least with the first round pick. And so Peterson, because Chester Taylor was like a 1,200 yard back.
Was Percy Harvin really in need when they took him in 2009?
Actually, I think that's a pretty, because they were pretty confident in Sidney Rice, and had good reason to be, it turns out. But
who was Bernard Berrien was on the other side, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So they were pretty. So I think Percy Harvin's a pretty good example of a first round not need.
And both of those were home run draft picks, like. And those you can consider those best player available. So if we're sitting at 23 and the best player available is Kancey in a position,
I don't know,
in a position that
how many 270 pounders have played for Brian Flores?
No, that's the thing. I just look at the tape and the guy's just a baller. Like there's certain things where you're just a baller. Like regardless of size, you can say I'm not sure on the whole aspects of John Randall's size. I know he is obviously smaller. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he was a baller. The guy was just a baller. So it would be hard.
They didn't draft him in the first round, though. That's the difference.
I know, no, very true.
Right.
But I'm saying is
signing him off the street.
But if you knew what John Randall was going to be or possibly be, he would be a first round talent, right? So Kancey is a first round talent for a reason, and he's still a first round talent even with his small size. So it would be hard for me to pass up Kancey. But cornerback is such an extreme need for us right now that it's just unless you find a way to trade back somehow, and I know we're not talking about trading up or trading back, but you got to go corner here. So I'm gonna be the boring guy and take the boring route and agree with the Arif here. I think we go Deontay Banks too. I just think the way the draft is going to fall, unless a cornerback falls. But
if Joey Porter's in striking distance,
please. So you would trade up for Joey Porter?
The two I would trade up for are Gonzalez and Porter. Okay, so not the cat out of, was it Syracuse or Illinois? Witherspoon. I like him. I don't know if I'd trade up for him.
Now, if he fell to 23 and it's him or Deontay Banks.
Oh yeah, take Witherspoon. Yeah, I mean,
Witherspoon over Banks.
I wouldn't hate either pick, right? I think there's enough question marks around Witherspoon where if they picked Banks, I'd just be like, I guess those question marks are probably a bigger deal than I thought. But if they picked pick him.
So how far did one of those two guys got to fall? You got to fall to 12. You got to fall to 17. Where do you find that? Okay, now they've fallen far enough to where we're interested.
First one's coming off top 8, top 7. First one's coming off for sure.
Yeah. 17 is a pretty reasonable move, because it's up like 6 picks or something like that. 12 is a long way, which I guess the Lions did it right, but the 12 is a long way.
Hey, if we
trade Kwesi to somebody and then make the trade for the cornerback and then trade him back, we'll do 3 trades.
If you could trade up 20 spots and give up the compensation that Detroit gave up, we would do it in a heartbeat.
And we'd forgive Kwesi for being on the other side of it last year. We'd let it go at that point. We still ain't let it go.
If that's what you get out of that trade up to 12, 100% I'd trade up to 12 for Porter or Gonzalez.
Okay,
cool. We got a lot of great info and a lot of great tidbits here from Arif Hasan from Pro Football Network. Be sure to go follow him on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL. I'm not sure. Do you have any podcasts or anything going on right now? Or are you just writing at the moment? And
I got 2 podcasts.
Shout out your podcast.
Yeah. One's a personal project. Been working on it for like 11, 12 years now. Me and my friend, Grand Forks, North Dakota. It's called Norse Code. You can find it wherever you find podcasts.
I'm such an idiot.
And then I don't worry about it. And then the other one is in the Locked On Podcast Network. It's Minnesota Football Party. It's like me, Sam Ekstrom, Luke Braun. Luke Inman's going to be out for the next couple episodes, but he's typically on there. And we get Ron Johnson on there every so often too. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So make sure you guys go and subscribe to that. Tap in with Arif and all the guys over there. They put on a great podcast. I'm sure I need to tap in and stop being out of the loop so much. But again, man, we appreciate you for tapping in. We know you're a busy guy. You gave us a lot of good info today, and I'm sure we'll get together again before the start of next season and talk some more Vikings football, man. So again, we appreciate you. Everybody else tapping in, be sure to hit that subscribe button on the Purple and Skull media page here on YouTube and as well on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter at SK_NFL and hit that subscribe button for Purple and Gold for days on YouTube and then as well on Twitter. I think it's JDay_24, right, Justin?
JDay_24. You are correct. I switched it up so we get all of our handles in there on the last shout out here. So there you go.
Sweet, awesome. Go give us a follow, hit that subscribe button, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Like, thank you for everybody for tapping in, hitting us with your questions. We'll talk to you soon, guys. Peace.
Go Vikes.